I never thought betrayal could come from the people I loved most. One ordinary morning at work, my own sister walked up to me and poured scalding coffee across my chest. The burn seared my skin, but what cut deeper was the laughter that erupted around me. Colleagues who smiled to my face now mocked me openly. My hands shook, my heart raced, and in that moment I wondered, had I been blind my entire life? Then the door opened and my billionaire husband stepped inside. What happened next silenced the room forever. And that was only the beginning. It was always the same. The phone rang at 2 a.m, slicing through my sleep like a blade. My mother's voice quivered on the other end, her breath ragged as she whispered, "Claire, I don't think I'll make it through the night. The pain is unbearable. The doctor says I need more tests, but I can't afford them." Half awake, half dreaming, I reached for my wallet, even before my mind caught up with her words. My heart thumped with fear that I might lose her if I didn't send the money immediately. By sunrise, I had wired over another $1,000. And just like every other time, the relief in her voice was instantaneous. She sounded lighter, almost cheerful. "You've always been my good girl," she said. I smiled faintly, proud to be the reliable daughter, even though a faint unease lingered at the edge of my thoughts. I pushed it away, convincing myself that this was what family was meant to be: sacrifice, loyalty, devotion. I didn't realize then that I was caught in a trap woven years ago. Psychologists call it trauma bonding, when your love and fear for someone become indistinguishable. I thought I was choosing my mother, but in truth, my body was conditioned to obey her calls. Oxytocin blurred the line between affection and manipulation. Every act of giving reinforced my belief that this was love. Still, I could not ignore the fatigue setting into my bones. Nights blurred into days, each call demanding more money, more of me. Yet every time I promised myself I would set a boundary, the sound of my mother's sobbing collapsed my resolve. I convinced myself I was strong enough to carry everyone's burdens. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid of what it would mean if I didn't. And then came the call I wished I had never answered. My father's voice was brisk, not trembling with illness, but sharp with urgency. "Claire, I need you to sign something. It's for the family's finances. Nothing big, just a formality. Don't ask questions, just trust me." I was too tired to argue, so I signed. Weeks later, a bill arrived in my name, thousands of dollars charged to a credit card I never opened. My father had used my identity to secure another line of credit, and now collectors were calling me day and night. When I confronted him, he scoffed. "After everything I've done for you, you can't handle a little responsibility? You owe this family. Stop being selfish." His words struck like a lash, and though I wanted to fight back, the old programming kicked in. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was selfish for questioning him. Then there was my sister. She posted a smiling photo on Facebook with a caption that read, "Some people pretend to be saints but can't even take care of their own family." The comments flooded with laughing emojis, distant relatives chiming in. "We all know who she means." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Just hours later, my sister called me, sobbing, begging for money to cover her rent. "You're the only one I can count on, Claire," she cried. I hesitated but eventually gave in. I began to sense the invisible cage forming around me. Family dinners felt like interrogations. Group chats buzzed with conversations I was never included in. My phone would ping with screenshots from acquaintances. A secret group chat where my parents and sister mocked me openly. They called me the gullible one, the bank, the drama queen. I laughed it off in front of others, but at night, staring at my reflection in the mirror, I whispered to myself, maybe they're right. Maybe I am the problem. There was a hollowness in that confession, like I had been erased from my own life. I wanted to scream, but I had no voice left. My face in the mirror looked like a stranger's, pale, tired, empty-eyed. I wondered if love was supposed to hurt this much. I tried to bury the thought, to remind myself of the sacrifices families make for one another. But deep inside, a quiet rebellion stirred, faint but persistent. It whispered that something was terribly wrong. I just didn't know how wrong until the next morning when I walked into the office. And that was the day everything shattered. The morning began like any other, but there was a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. I walked into the office, clutching a stack of reports, trying to convince myself that today would be normal. It wasn't. My sister was already there, waiting. She held a paper cup, steam curling upward, the bitter smell of coffee cutting through the air. Her eyes glinted with something dark, something I had seen before but always ignored. Before I could speak, she strode toward me. In one swift motion, she tilted the cup and poured its contents down my blouse. The scalding liquid burned my skin, spreading heat across my chest and stomach. I gasped, but the sting of pain was drowned out by the laughter that erupted around us. My coworkers didn't rush to help. They laughed. They laughed at me. I froze, standing in a puddle of coffee and shame. My cheeks flamed hotter than the burn. I searched for a sympathetic face, a hand, anything. But all I saw were smirks and whispers. My sister smirked too, leaning in just enough to hiss, "You'll always be the family joke." The humiliation cut deeper than the coffee. My hands shook, my throat tightened. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. And then the office door opened. My husband walked in. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked around the room, his expression unreadable. Then, with a voice so cold it made the air itself feel sharp, he asked, "Who did this?" No one answered. Silence stretched, uncomfortable until his gaze landed on my sister. She lifted her chin, defiant. Within minutes, he fired everyone in that room. Every single one. Their laughter turned into panic, then rage, but his authority was final. They filed out in shock, my sister screaming threats as she was escorted away. The room emptied, and I stood there shaking, soaked and humiliated. My husband placed his jacket around my shoulders, but instead of relief, I felt something else, shame. Shame that I couldn't defend myself. Shame that I needed him to save me. The humiliation twisted into self-disgust. I was grateful, yes, but underneath I wondered, was I so weak that I couldn't stand on my own? That night, when the sting of the burn still lingered on my skin, I searched through my parents' old files, desperate for answers, for something that would explain why they let my sister treat me this way. That was when I found it. The will. My name wasn't there. It had been carefully removed, replaced by my sister's. Every asset, every property, every inheritance went to her. I stared at the paper, my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't jealousy. This wasn't petty cruelty. This was a coordinated effort to erase me from the family, to strip me of everything. For years they had mocked me, drained me, gaslit me into believing I was selfish. And now they had written me out of existence. The betrayal was so sharp I couldn't breathe. I gripped the paper, my knuckles white. All the midnight calls, the fake illnesses, the credit card in my name, they weren't isolated events. They were part of something bigger, a web designed to entangle me until I had nothing left. The next morning, I began my transformation. I bought a small recorder and slipped it into my purse. I checked my phone, saving every message, every email. I began to note patterns in their words, how often guilt was used as a weapon, how shame was twisted into control. Each day, I collected fragments of truth, small but powerful. I started therapy. At first, I sat in silence, arms crossed, telling myself I didn't need it. But then the tears came, uninvited, unstoppable. I confessed what I had never admitted aloud. I still wish they loved me. My voice broke, and in that crack, I felt the weight of decades lift just slightly. I wasn't cold, I wasn't heartless. I was still that little girl who wanted her mother's approval, her father's pride, her sister's love. But I knew now I could no longer let that desire chain me. I walked out of that session with swollen eyes, but a steadier heart. My therapist's words echoed in my head. Love without respect is not love, and you deserve both. I wasn't a warrior yet, but I was no longer a victim. I was becoming a strategist. Every detail, every slip, every lie they told became a weapon in my hands. I planned in silence, building my armor not out of steel, but out of truth. Still, there was one thought that haunted me as I locked away the forged will in a safe place. If they were willing to erase me on paper, what else were they willing to do? And I was about to find out. The night I found the will, something inside me shifted. I was no longer the frightened daughter waiting for approval. I was a woman determined to uncover every lie they had buried. But to do that, I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. I reached out to Daniel, a college friend who now worked in cybersecurity. His voice was steady when I explained what I needed. They've been deleting messages. I know they're hiding something. Can you help me? Hours later, an encrypted folder arrived in my inbox. My hands trembled as I opened it. There they were, hundreds of messages between my mother and sister. The words blurred as I scrolled, but the meaning was sharp, merciless. We'll say it's cancer this time, that always gets her attention. My stomach turned. They weren't just manipulating me. They were staging entire performances, rehearsing lies about terminal illness to siphon money from me. I pressed my palm against my mouth, choking on disgust. These weren't moments of desperation. They were strategies. My mother's late-night sobs, my sister's trembling voice, all rehearsed. I wanted to believe the world had turned upside down, but deep down, I knew this was the reality I had refused to see. Still reeling, I dug deeper. In another set of files, I discovered property records. A plot of land once deeded in my name had been quietly sold. The signature wasn't mine, though it bore my name. My father had forged it, cashing in on something meant to be my security. My inheritance had been liquidated to cover his debts. I felt my chest constrict, rage and sorrow colliding until I could barely breathe. My family hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, they had stolen from me erased my future, and mocked me for not seeing it. But the worst revelation came from an unexpected source. One evening, as I stared at the files on my computer, an email appeared from an address I didn't recognize. A former coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, had attached an audio file. I hesitated before clicking play. The voices were unmistakable: my sister, my parents, and others from my family. They were plotting in low, venomous tones. "We'll flood social media with stories. Make her look unstable. People already laugh at her. Let's give them more reasons." Laughter followed, cold and cruel. "By the time we're done, no one will believe a word she says." I leaned back in my chair, staring into the darkened room. The coffee burn had scarred my skin, but this scar was deeper. They weren't content to humiliate me in private. They wanted to destroy my reputation, turn the world against me, erase my voice before I even spoke. In that moment, I understood. I couldn't fight them alone. I needed allies. My husband had already begun moving in silence. Without telling me, he had hired a private investigator, someone skilled at uncovering the kind of fraud my family specialized in. One evening, he handed me a folder. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a timeline that made my head spin. He looked at me and said quietly, "They've been at this longer than you think, but now we have them." Not long after, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call. My aunt, my mother's estranged sister, asked to meet. I hadn't seen her in years, but she pressed a folder into my hands. "They ruined me too," she whispered. Inside were documents exposing years of my father's financial schemes. She had kept them hidden, waiting for the day someone brave enough would confront him. My therapist became another ally. She taught me how to steady my breath when panic threatened to undo me, how to sit across from my family without flinching. "Your strength," she said, "is not in matching their cruelty. It's in refusing to let them break you." I carried those words like armor. And then there was Rachel, my best friend from college, now a media strategist. When I showed her the evidence, her eyes hardened. "If they go public, so will we, but on our terms." She promised to craft the narrative, to make sure the truth wasn't drowned by lies. Piece by piece, my army assembled. Not warriors of blood, but of truth. Each ally added a layer of defense I had never known before. For the first time, I wasn't alone. One night, I sat by the window with all the evidence spread before me: texts, recordings, forged signatures, photographs. My hands hovered over the audio file that could shatter everything. My reflection glimmered faintly against the glass, and I whispered, "If I press play, nothing will ever be the same again." The city outside buzzed with life, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. My heart pounded with both dread and anticipation, because I knew the opportunity was coming, a gathering where the family would all be present, a stage too perfect to waste. It was a wedding, and that was where everything would begin. The wedding was held in a grand ballroom, glittering with chandeliers and polished marble floors. Everyone in the family was there, dressed in their finest, laughter and champagne spilling over as though nothing had ever been broken between us. I sat in the corner, my pulse racing. In my purse was the recorder, the files, and the audio that could tear through the illusion my family had spun for decades. I waited for the moment, the toast, the silence that followed when everyone turned to listen. My plan was simple: stand, play the recording, and let the truth speak louder than their lies. My palms were damp, but I was ready. At least I thought I was. Before I could rise, my sister stepped to the front. Her dress shimmered under the lights, her face painted with the fragility of a victim. "I need to say something," she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. Murmurs spread through the room. She lifted a glass and said, "It's about Claire. My sister has been unwell. She believes things that aren't real. She thinks we've plotted against her, that we've stolen from her. It breaks my heart to see her like this. She's not herself." Gasps echoed, heads turned toward me, eyes full of pity, suspicion, and even disgust. "Mental illness runs in families," she added, her voice soft, dripping with false sincerity. "We need to support her, not condemn her." I froze, words caught in my throat. In a single move, she had flipped the script. I wasn't the truth teller anymore. I was the unstable one. The room shifted with whispers. "Poor thing. She's delusional." My chest constricted, my legs weak beneath me. For a terrifying moment, I believed them. I clutched the recorder, but my hand faltered. What if they didn't believe me? What if I played it, and they dismissed it as more hallucinations? My sister's crocodile tears glistened under the lights, and sympathy flooded her way. I sat down slowly, suffocated by the realization that I might have lost everything before I even began. But beside me, my husband leaned in, his voice low, steady. "Let her speak, and when she's done, we'll show them." Minutes later, he rose. The room hushed, expecting a billionaire's casual toast. Instead, he held up a small remote and pressed play. The speakers crackled, and then came the voices, my sister's laughter, my mother's plotting, my father's schemes. Clear, undeniable. "Say it's cancer this time. Claire always falls for that. She's too gullible to ever fight back. Let's make her look insane. Post it online, spread it. No one will believe her." The ballroom froze. Forks clattered onto plates, jaws dropped. My sister's face drained of color. She stammered, That's not real. She faked it." But the damage was done. Every guest had heard the venom in her voice, the cold calculation in my parents' tones. A silence heavier than stone filled the room. No one applauded. No one laughed. The illusion of a perfect family shattered in a single recording. But my family wasn't finished. Within hours, they launched an attack online. Posts appeared on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Claims that I was manipulative, greedy, dangerous. Old photos were twisted into narratives, stories fabricated to discredit me. A smear campaign spread like wildfire. I might have crumbled, except for what happened next. Someone leaked the recording. It hit TikTok, shared by strangers who captioned it. "When your family is the real villain." Within hours, millions had watched. The comments poured in. "Stay strong, Claire. She's my hero for standing up. Proof that blood isn't always family." I sat in my bedroom late at night, phone in hand, scrolling through the comments. My eyes blurred with tears, not from pain, but from a strange, fierce relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone. Strangers across the world were telling me I wasn't crazy, that they believed me. I pressed the phone to my chest and cried, letting the years of silence break open. But even as I cried, I knew this wasn't the end. Social media had given me validation, but justice demanded more than likes and shares. The truth had gone public, yes, but consequences, real, tangible consequences, had yet to fall. And I was ready to make sure they did. The morning after the wedding, my phone buzzed with a call from my lawyer. His voice was calm but firm. It's time. We had everything we needed: recordings, financial records, forged documents, witnesses. Together we filed the lawsuit, naming each of them: my father for financial fraud, my mother for conspiracy, my sister for harassment and defamation. The paperwork felt heavy in my hands, but not as heavy as the years of silence I had carried. The investigation began quickly. My father was the first to crumble. The authorities traced his debts and discovered the land sold under my forged signature. He denied it, of course, but the paper trail was undeniable. Forgery, fraud, tax evasion. The words sounded surreal as the charges mounted. My childhood image of him, stern but dependable, collapsed. My mother's secrets unraveled next. Medical records showed no trace of the illnesses she had claimed for years. Doctors confirmed she had fabricated her diagnoses, manipulating not just me, but neighbors, relatives, anyone who could be convinced to hand her money. The story broke in the local paper. Woman fakes cancer to extort daughter. She vanished from public sight after that, too ashamed to leave her home. As for my sister, the fallout was swift. The company she worked for couldn't ignore the viral recording. She was called in, humiliated in front of her colleagues, and dismissed. Former friends unfollowed her. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. The smirk she once wore so proudly was gone, replaced by bitterness and isolation. But the most unexpected moment came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My cousin, Mark. He called me quietly one evening, his voice thick with shame. "Claire, they did the same to me. They ruined my credit, stole money in my name. I was too scared to fight back." For the first time, I realized I wasn't the only victim. The net they cast had ensnared others, too. My fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. I thought the courtroom, the exposure, the arrests, these were the final notes of the story. But as Mark's voice cracked through the line, I felt something shift. This wasn't an ending. This was a beginning. Claire thought it was the end, but a new door was opening. The months that followed transformed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. News outlets picked up my story, and soon I found myself sitting under studio lights, microphones pointed my way. The host leaned in and asked softly, "Claire, why speak now?" I swallowed hard, then looked into the camera. Because silence is how they win. For years I thought I was alone, ashamed, and broken. But I wasn't, and neither are the millions of others living with toxic families. I'm speaking for the ones who can't. The audience erupted in applause, but what mattered most were the letters that began pouring in. Women, men, children, all telling me, "You told my story." The more I listened, the clearer my mission became. With the settlement money, I founded a nonprofit, the Phoenix Fund, dedicated to helping survivors of toxic families rebuild their lives. We provided legal aid, therapy sessions, housing support. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about transformation. At our first support group meeting, I stood in a circle with a dozen women. Their faces were pale, their eyes tired, but there was a spark, hope flickering in their chests. As one by one they shared their stories, tears spilled freely. I stepped forward, arms open, and soon we were in an embrace. Dozen voices sobbing, trembling, healing together. For years I had cried alone, but that night I cried with others, and it felt different. It felt like release. Anger had fueled me, but now something else was taking its place, healing. The shift was quiet, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. I was no longer chasing retribution. I was building something bigger than myself. The world began to see me not as a victim, but as a survivor, a leader. Journalists called me the voice for the voiceless. Invitations poured in, conferences, interviews, panels. Each time I told my story, I felt lighter. Each time someone in the crowd whispered, "That's my story too." I knew I was doing what I was meant to do. And yet, as I stood before a crowd of hundreds one evening, the applause thundering around me, I couldn't shake the sense that something greater was still waiting. Justice had been served, healing had begun. But destiny, I felt, had one more surprise. And the most wonderful part was yet to come. In the months after the court case, I began to build walls. Not walls of stone or steel, but boundaries stronger than either. For the first time, I embraced no contact. I changed my number, blocked their emails, and refused to answer the door when their shadows appeared on my porch. At first, it felt unnatural, even cruel, but each day of silence gave me back a piece of myself. The nights grew quieter, and in that quiet, I finally heard my own voice. Social media had once been a weapon they used to humiliate me. Now I reclaimed it. I deleted the hateful comments, unfollowed the names that poisoned my screen, and filled my pages with something new. Messages of resilience, glimpses of joy, and updates from the Phoenix Fund. Slowly, people began to follow, not for gossip, but for hope. I watched the numbers rise, but what mattered most were the private messages. "Because of you, I left. Your story gave me strength, and with the settlement secured, I launched a social enterprise tied to the foundation. It provided jobs for survivors, a chance to earn with dignity, and training to start anew. Watching these women, once broken, now learning to code, to bake, to build, it lit something inside me, brighter than any revenge ever had. But even in my new world, the old one came knocking. One afternoon, a letter arrived. My hands shook as I recognized the handwriting. My sister. She begged for forgiveness, claiming she had been manipulated, that she wanted to start over. For a moment, old habits tugged at me. The little girl inside whispered, "Maybe this time she means it." I met her once in a cafe near the edge of town. She looked smaller, thinner, her arrogance deflated. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "I'm sorry. Please, let's start again." My heart twisted. I had dreamt of this moment, of an apology, for so long. I reached across the table and touched her hand gently and said, "I forgive you, but I won't return." Her face collapsed, and she left without another word. I sat alone afterward, breathing deeply, a strange peace settling over me. Forgiveness wasn't for her, it was for me. And in that cafe, something inside me finally closed. Life after toxic ties wasn't a fairy tale. Healing came in waves, some small, some overwhelming. But with each wave, I grew steadier. I learned that family wasn't defined by blood, but by trust, kindness, and respect. I found my chosen family, friends who stood beside me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. With them, I laughed again, danced again, lived again. The world began to see me differently, too. No longer the silent victim, I became the guide. I was invited to schools, conferences, and global forums to speak about toxic families, to give others the map I had never been given. Standing before crowds of strangers, I told the truth, raw and unpolished. They broke me, but breaking isn't the end. It's the beginning of something stronger. Every time I spoke, someone would cry. Every time someone would whisper, "That's my story too." I carried those voices with me like armor. One evening, I walked onto a stage in New York, the spotlight blazing down on me. Hundreds filled the auditorium, their eyes fixed on me. For a heartbeat, I was that little girl again, desperate to be heard. But when I opened my mouth, my voice didn't tremble. I spoke of betrayal, of pain, of coffee scalding skin, of forged wills and stolen futures. I spoke of strategy, of evidence, of justice served. I spoke of healing, forgiveness, and freedom. And when I finished, silence fell heavy, followed by a roar of applause that shook the walls. The audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, crying. My eyes blurred as I stood there, bathed in light, no longer invisible, no longer erased. For the first time in my life, I am truly free.